welcome back to Mr. Dreadmere. Tonight, I have 11 real, untold, most disturbing true New Year's Eve horror stories. Mr. Dreadmere, Mr. Dreadmere. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Mr. Dreadmere, you don't walk alone. I was already counting heads when the security monitor flickered, and I remember feeling irritated before I felt afraid. It was 5 minutes to midnight. The kids were loud and careless in that way teenagers get when they think adults have stopped paying attention, and I was the only volunteer who hadn't stepped outside yet. I leaned closer to the small black and white screen behind the front desk, checking corridors out of habit, and that was when I saw movement in the west classroom, the one that was supposed to be locked. I told myself it had to be a glitch. The school had been closed for years, reopened only for community events like this dance. The cameras were older than some of the students. Still, I watched the screen, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my sweater, and the movement didn't stop. It wasn't fast or frantic. It was slow, like someone shifting weight from foot to foot. I radioed Lars, the janitor, and asked if he had unlocked the west wing for storage. He laughed and said no. That wing had been sealed since before he started working for the municipality. He told me to relax and wished me a happy new year early. I remember feeling embarrassed for even asking. I turned my attention back to the gym, clapping my hands and yelling for everyone to start the countdown practice again. They groaned, but they did it. 10, 9, 8. I smiled and nodded, pretending everything was fine, while my eyes kept drifting back to the hallway door. When I looked at the monitor again, the movement had stopped. I tried to forget it. I really did. But after the practice countdown, when the music started back up and the kids scattered, I checked the monitor one more time. The classroom door on the screen was open now. I knew it hadn't been before. I felt a small, sharp panic, like stepping on glass. I grabbed my coat and told one of the older girls to keep an eye on things. I said I'd be right back. The hallway was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong when you've just left a noisy room. My footsteps echoed more than they should have. When I reached the west wing door, it was locked, just like it was supposed to be. I stood there, staring at the lock, then at the monitor through the glass window in the door. The camera still showed the classroom open. I remember whispering, "That's not possible," like saying it out loud might fix it. I unlocked the door with the master key they'd given me for emergencies, my hand shaking enough that I dropped the keys once. Inside, the air felt stale, heavy. The classroom door at the end of the hall was open, just like on the screen. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty space, asking if anyone was there. No answer. I walked in slowly, every step feeling like a mistake. The desks were old, carved and scarred. I noticed the names right away, scratched deep into the wood. At first I thought they were just the usual initials and hearts. Then I realized they were full names, first and last, repeated on multiple desks. I recognized none of them. What chilled me wasn't just the names, but the dates carved beside them. Graduation years that didn't make sense, all ending in 1980. I checked my watch. 2 minutes to midnight. The radio crackled on my chest, and I nearly screamed. It was the girl from the gym, telling me the countdown was starting for real this time. I told her to wait, my voice tight, and she asked if I was joking. In that moment, the classroom door behind me creaked shut on its own. I spun around, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. The handle wouldn't move when I tried it. I remember crying then, not loudly. Just a few breaths of panic slipping out before I forced myself to stop. I looked back at the desks, at the names, and realized there were more now than before. Fresh lines in the wood, pale and raw. The security monitor in the corner buzzed to life, showing the gym. I could see the kids, arms around each other, laughing, counting down. 10, 9, 8. I slammed my fist against the door and screamed for help, but the sound felt swallowed, like the room didn't want to let it out. 7, 6. I don't know why I did it, but I read the nearest name out loud. As soon as I did, the monitor cut to another feed, older, grainier. It showed the same classroom, full of students in old clothes, dancing, smiling. I recognized the year on a banner behind them, 1980, 5, 4. I understood then. This wasn't about me trespassing. This was about finishing something that had never ended. I went desk to desk, reading names as fast as I could, my voice hoarse, my eyes burning. With each name, the door rattled harder, like something was trying to get out. 3, 2. When I read the last name, the monitor went black. The door flew open, and I fell forward into the hallway, sobbing, gasping for air. From the gym. I heard the final one, then the cheer of the new year. They found me there a few minutes later. I told them everything. The police came. The records were checked. Those names belonged to students who had died in a fire at a New Year's Eve dance in that same gym decades earlier. The classroom had been their temporary holding area, the only room that didn't burn. The desks were sanded clean the next week. The cameras were removed. The West Wing was sealed again. I never volunteered after that. Every New Year since, I stay home, and when the countdown reaches 0, I whisper those names one last time, just to be sure they stay gone. The first call came through while I was sorting discharge papers, and I remember being annoyed because the phone system was supposed to be locked down for the night. It was already past 11. The nurses were focused on their rounds, and I was counting minutes until midnight so I could step outside and smoke before the year changed. The display showed an internal extension I didn't recognize, and when I picked up, all I heard was breathing, thin and shallow. I asked who was calling, using the same calm voice I always used, and a child answered. The voice was young, careful, like they were afraid of being overheard. They asked if their parents had arrived yet, because they were told they could go home before the new year. I glanced at the extension again and felt a flicker of unease. It was listed as coming from the old pediatric ward, the one sealed since the late 70s. I told the child there must be a mistake. I said the ward was closed, that no one was there. The line went silent for a second. Then the child whispered that they were still waiting, and the call disconnected. I sat there staring at the phone, my irritation gone, replaced by something heavier. I checked the system logs, expecting to see an error, but the call was recorded as valid, originating exactly where it shouldn't have. I stood up and walked the length of the reception desk, trying to convince myself it was a prank routed through old wiring. The hospital was full of forgotten cables and half-removed systems. That explanation almost worked until the phone rang again. Same extension. This time, when I answered, a different child spoke. This one sounded older, maybe 10 or 11, and asked the same question, worded the same way, about their parents coming before the year changed. I asked their name. They told me. Clearly. I wrote it down without thinking. I asked their parents' names. They gave me those too, then asked if I could check again, because the clock in their room had stopped. I felt cold then, a slow chill spreading from my chest. I told them to stay where they were and hung up, my hand shaking enough that I almost dropped the receiver. I went to the archive terminal and searched the name. It took longer than it should have, the system lagging like it didn't want to cooperate. When the record finally came up, my mouth went dry. The child had been admitted in 1974. Cause of death listed as complications from infection. I checked the parents' names, both deceased. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, telling myself it had to be coincidence. The phone rang again before I could stand. And again. Each call from the same ward. Each voice different. Some crying. Some angry. all asking the same question. I stopped answering after the fifth one and just listened to the ringing, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I radioed the night supervisor and told her something was wrong with the phone system. She told me to calm down and said maintenance would look at it after the holiday. I answered the next call because I couldn't stand not knowing. This one was very small, a voice barely more than a breath. They didn't ask about their parents. They asked if it would hurt when the year changed. That broke something in me. I told them no, that everything would be fine, and they said they hoped so, because last time it hurt a lot. I checked the time. 11:58. I left the desk, rules be damned, and walked toward the sealed ward. Every step felt wrong, like I was moving against something pushing me back. The door was still locked. The warning sign faded but legible. I pressed my ear against it. I could hear voices inside. Not screams, talking. Murmuring. Waiting, I ran back to the desk and grabbed the master phone key, the one that allowed manual routing. My hands fumbled as I tried to redirect the calls to my console only. When I finally succeeded, the ringing stopped. For a moment, there was silence, heavy and expectant. Then the line opened on its own. Dozens of voices came through at once, overlapping, asking, pleading, counting. I couldn't make out individual words, just the sense of urgency of time running out. I shouted into the receiver that their parents weren't coming, that they needed to listen to me, that they had to let go. I don't know why I said that. It just felt true. The voices quieted, one by one, until only one remained. The first child. They asked if that meant they had to stay again. I closed my eyes and told them no. I told them they could go now, that it was okay. There was a pause, then a small sigh, like relief. The line went dead. The clock behind the desk clicked over to midnight. The system rebooted itself, lights flickering briefly. When everything stabilized, I checked the logs. No calls recorded. Nothing. I went back to the archive and pulled every pediatric death record from that ward. The names I'd written down were all there, all dated December 31st. In the weeks that followed, the hospital board finally approved demolition of the sealed wing. I watched from the courtyard when they opened it. There were no beds, no equipment, just rows of small chairs lined up against the walls facing the door, like they had been waiting to be called. I quit soon after. I still work nights, but never in hospitals anymore. Every New Year's Eve, when the clock gets close to midnight, I turn my phone off and sit in silence, remembering those voices and hoping they finally found their way home. I answered the phone while pulling on my boots, already irritated because New Year's Eve calls were usually last minute and messy. The dispatcher said a parent needed emergency childcare, cash ready, just until midnight. I asked for the address and wrote it down, recognizing the street as one I'd driven past plenty of times but never stopped on. I told myself it was fine, just another short job, and drove out without thinking much more about it. The house was dark when I arrived, darker than it should have been. I knocked twice before the door opened a few centimeters on its own, stopping against a chain that wasn't actually latched. I called out, using my professional voice, announcing who I was. No adult answered. I pushed the door the rest of the way and stepped inside, immediately noticing the smell of dust and something older, like a place that hadn't been lived in for a long time. I almost left right then. But before I could turn around, a small voice came from deeper in the house calling my name, not babysitter, or miss, but my actual name. That stopped me cold. I asked who was there, my heart already beating too fast. A child stepped into the hallway light, barefoot, wearing pajamas that looked too thin for the time of year. They smiled like they were relieved to see me, and said I was late, but it was okay because I promised not to leave before midnight. I told them there had to be a mistake, that I'd just arrived. that I needed to find their parents. The child frowned and said their parents were busy packing and that I should come see the toys before they cooled down. I followed them because leaving felt suddenly impossible. The living room furniture was covered in sheets, the kind people use when they're moving out or renovating. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal things anywhere, except a small pile of toys arranged neatly on the floor. I knelt and touched a stuffed animal without thinking. It was warm, like it had just been held. I asked how long they'd been alone. The child shrugged and said time was strange on this night, that it went faster and slower at the same time. I checked my phone. No signal. The clock on the wall read 11:30, but it ticked unevenly, pausing too long between seconds. I tried to call the dispatcher again. No dial tone. I asked the child when their parents had left. They said years ago. Then corrected themselves and said minutes ago, depending on which year I meant. That made my stomach drop. I told them I needed to step outside for air. They grabbed my sleeve, their hands surprisingly strong, and reminded me of my promise. I asked what would happen if I left. The child looked past me, toward the covered windows, and said they'd have to stay again, just like last time. I asked what last time meant. They sat down and picked up a toy car, rolling it back and forth, saying the babysitter before me broke her promise, and everything went wrong after the countdown. I forced myself to stay calm. Told them I wasn't going anywhere, that I just needed to understand. I asked their name. They told me, and it sounded familiar in a way I couldn't place. I asked their parents' names. They gave those too, and something clicked painfully in my head. I remembered an old case from my training days. A house fire. A child left home alone on New Year's Eve. Babysitter never showed. The house burned while neighbors watched fireworks. No survivors. I felt sick. Standing there in that silent room, realizing the house around me was the same one from the report. I asked the child what year it was. They said 2006. Because that was the last year anyone answered the phone. The clock jumped forward suddenly. 11:58. The child stood up, panic flashing across their face, and begged me not to leave, not yet, not until the year changed. I understood then what they needed. Not supervision, not company, closure. I sat with them on the floor, ignoring the urge to run, and told them I was there. We counted together, slowly, the numbers feeling heavier as they fell. When we reached 0, the house shuddered, like releasing a long-held breath. The toys went cold beneath my fingers. The child smiled softly, said thank you, and asked me to open the door. I did. The hallway beyond was empty. The house felt hollow now, truly abandoned. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed back to life. The dispatcher apologized, said the call must have glitched, but the address had been vacant for years. I never took emergency calls again. Every New Year's Eve, I stay somewhere bright and full of people, and I never promise anyone I'll stay past midnight unless I know I can keep it. I was halfway through my first patrol when the fireworks started, sharp pops echoing off the stone walls, and I remember smiling to myself because it meant the night would pass quietly. New Year's Eve shifts were usually calm. Most of the town gathered near the river, far from the old prison complex, and my job was just to walk the perimeter, check locks, and watch monitors until morning. I had done it dozens of times without incident. I was in the control room when the first flash of color lit up the security screens. The fireworks reflected off the narrow windows of the decommissioned wing, the one sealed after the inmate transfer years earlier. I watched out of mild curiosity. The way light moved across empty corridors, always looking stranger on camera than in person. That was when I noticed the silhouettes. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a trick of light and glass. But the shapes were too solid, too slow, human outlines standing inside the cells. I leaned closer to the monitor, my coffee forgotten, my hand resting on the desk. The wing was supposed to be empty. I had locked it myself at the start of the shift. I checked the camera number to make sure I wasn't misreading it. Same feed, same wing. I zoomed in. My fingers suddenly clumsy on the controls. The figures didn't move much. They just stood there, some gripping bars that no longer existed, others sitting on bunks that had been removed years ago. My first thought was trespassers. Idiots sneaking in to get a look at fireworks from a restricted area. I cursed under my breath and grabbed my flashlight and radio, telling myself this was routine. Still, my stomach felt tight as I walked down the corridor toward the sealed wing. The fireworks boomed overhead, counting down the last minutes of the year. The door was still locked, the seal unbroken. I tested it twice, harder the second time, and felt a flicker of panic. I radioed my supervisor, but the line crackled with static. He told me to wait until after midnight, that the fireworks interfered with reception, and asked if I was sure about what I saw. I said yes, even though doubt was starting to creep in. I went back to the monitors. The silhouettes were clearer now, illuminated in bursts of red and gold light. I noticed details then. Heights, postures. One man limped slightly, favoring his left side. Another held his hands behind his back, the way long-term inmates sometimes did even when free. I felt a chill when recognition hit me. Not recognition of faces, but of forms. I had worked here long enough to remember some of them. I pulled an old transfer log from the filing cabinet, my hands shaking as I flipped pages. The date matched. Same night, same year. The night they moved the last inmates out before shutting the wing down. The log listed names and notes, injuries, habits. One entry mentioned a limp. Another described a prisoner who refused to let his hands drop, even in his sleep. My mouth went dry. I looked back at the screen. The figures hadn't changed positions. They were waiting. The fireworks grew louder. I realized midnight was seconds away. I didn't know why that mattered, but it felt important. The silhouettes began to shift, turning toward the camera toward me. I spoke out loud without meaning to, telling them to stop, telling myself this wasn't real. The monitors flickered as the first cheer of the new year echoed faintly from town. For a moment, the screens went white. When the image returned, the wing was empty again. Completely. No shadows, no movement. I stood there breathing hard, waiting for my heart to slow. I told myself it was over, that adrenaline and memory had played tricks on me. I logged the incident anyway, forcing my hand to write clearly, even though I knew how it would sound. After my shift, I stayed late. I unlocked the wing with a second guard present, needing proof for myself. The corridors were bare, dusty, untouched. But when we reached the far end, we found marks on the floor. Footprints, old, worn into the stone, like paths traced again and again by pacing feet. The investigation that followed was quiet. Officially, nothing was found. Unofficially, an older administrator told me the truth. The transfer years earlier had been rushed. A firework celebration, a deadline, paperwork pushed through without checks. Several inmates had been left behind during a wing closure, trapped when a fire broke out elsewhere in the complex. Their deaths were recorded as part of another incident. No one noticed the discrepancy. The wing was demolished months later. I watched the walls come down, feeling relief I couldn't explain. I left the job soon after. I still hear fireworks differently now, not as celebration, but as a signal. A reminder that some places remember who was forgotten, and sometimes, just for a moment, they show you. I was standing on a chair so everyone could hear me when the counting started, my uncle laughing and telling me to speak louder, my cousins clapping out of rhythm. I liked being the one to count, because the adults always messed it up, skipping numbers or shouting too early. I remember feeling proud, holding my breath between numbers, watching the clock above the television as it crawled toward midnight. 10, 9, 8. Everyone joined in, their voices blending into noise, but I stayed focused on the seconds slipping away. When I reached 0, the room erupted the way it always did. Hugs and cheers and glasses clinking, but something felt unfinished in my chest, like a sentence cut off halfway through. Without thinking, I kept going. -1, I said, clearly, because it felt right. The room quieted in confusion. My mother laughed nervously and told me to stop being silly, but I shook my head. -2, -3. I wasn't joking. The numbers came easily, like I was reading them off something only I could see. At -4, my grandfather coughed hard and grabbed his chest. Someone spilled a drink reaching for him. At -5, he collapsed onto the carpet, his face turning a color I didn't have words for yet. The room exploded into shouting, adults rushing, someone calling emergency services. I kept counting, my voice shaking but steady, because stopping felt impossible. -6, -7. At -8, my aunt screamed that I needed to shut up, that this was my fault, that I was doing something wrong. The paramedics arrived fast, but they couldn't save him. They said it was sudden, that it could have happened any time. Everyone wanted to believe that. No one wanted to look at me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers sliding past 0, stretching into something dark and endless. In the weeks that followed, my family treated it like a bad coincidence, an ugly story we weren't supposed to tell. But I noticed things. When I counted backward in my head, small things happened. A bird hit a window. A neighbor slipped on ice. A dog ran into the road. I learned quickly not to say the numbers out loud. I learned to keep my mouth shut and my thoughts quiet. The next New Year's Eve, my parents insisted we celebrate again, like nothing had changed. They thought normal would fix me. I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, watching the clock, my heart pounding louder with every passing second. When they asked me to count again, I shook my head so hard it hurt. My father tried to coax me, telling me it was tradition, telling me not to be afraid. I wanted to tell him the numbers were already moving, that I could feel them pulling me backward, but I didn't have the words. Someone else counted that year. I covered my ears when they reached 0. I still heard it inside my head. -1, -2. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, forcing myself not to speak. At -3, there was a crash outside, tires screeching. At -4, an ambulance siren wailed in the distance. My mother looked at me then, really looked, and something in her face changed. After that, my parents took me to doctors, then specialists. They said I was anxious, imaginative, traumatized. I learned new words, none of which explained the numbers. I stopped going to parties. I stopped watching clocks. But time doesn't care if you look at it or not. It keeps moving, dragging numbers behind it like a shadow. Years later, when I was old enough to understand death properly, I asked my mother about that night. She told me the truth she'd avoided. My grandfather had been sick. His heart was weak. It was always going to happen. She said that over and over, like repetition could make it solid. I nodded and pretended to agree. I didn't tell her about the things I'd kept track of, the dates and times that lined up too cleanly to ignore. I learned to use it eventually, though I hate admitting that. When a neighbor was violent, when a drunk driver sped down our street every night, when a man hurt someone I cared about, I counted backward under my breath. I told myself I was just noticing patterns, not causing them. 'Cause an effect blur when you don't want to see the line between them. The last time I counted out loud was the year I decided to stop running from it. I was older then, tired of feeling like time owned me. I stood alone, watching the clock tick toward midnight, my hands steady. I counted down with the rest of the world, my voice calm. When 0 hit, I waited. The numbers tugged at me, begging to continue. I took a breath and refused. Nothing happened. No sirens, no screams, just quiet. ordinary seconds passing like they always had. I don't know if the power faded because I grew stronger, or because it was never power at all. Just a way of understanding what was already coming. I still feel the pull sometimes, especially at the edge of a new year. But now I let the numbers go forward, and I let the past stay where it belongs. I was checking the manifest with numb fingers when the ferry horn sounded, long and low, rolling across the harbor just before midnight. I remember glancing at the clock and feeling relieved, because it meant the last arrival of the year was on time. New Year's Eve shifts were dull but predictable. And predictability mattered when you were alone in a glass office with nothing but paperwork and radio static for company. The ferry eased in exactly as scheduled. I logged the arrival, stamped the manifest, and watched passengers disembark through the windows. Families, couples, a few truck drivers. Nothing unusual. The captain waved from the bridge, and I waved back out of habit. By the time the ramp lifted again, it was minutes to midnight, and I poured myself bad coffee and waited for the countdown. When the new year came, it passed quietly. A few distant cheers from town. Some fireworks reflecting faintly off the water. I reset the logbook, writing the new date carefully, and prepared to finish the shift. That was when the radio crackled and announced an incoming ferry. I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. There was only one scheduled arrival that night. I picked up the receiver and asked for clarification. The operator repeated the message, giving the same ferry name, the same route, the same arrival code. I checked the clock again. Just past 1. I told myself schedules changed. I pulled out a fresh manifest and waited. When the ferry appeared through the harbor lights, my stomach tightened. It was the same vessel, same markings, same wear along the hull. It docked in the same position, slow and precise, like it was replaying a memory. I watched the ramp lower, my heart beating too fast now. Passengers stepped off. The same number, the same shapes. I recognized a woman in a red coat who had argued with her husband earlier. A man with a limp. A teenage boy carrying a guitar case. They walked past me again, eyes unfocused, faces blank, as if I wasn't there. I checked the manifest with shaking hands. Same names, same ages, same seat numbers. My breath caught when I reached the middle of the list. Several names were circled in red. Notes scribbled beside them from an earlier call. Declared deceased. A car accident on the coastal road after disembarking. A heart attack in the parking lot. A man who slipped from the dock edge and drowned before help arrived. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. I shouted for them to stop, to wait, to tell me what was happening. None of them reacted. They moved past me and into the night, following the same paths they had before. I ran outside, calling the harbor master, my voice breaking. He answered groggily, irritated, told me to stop joking. I dragged him to the window and pointed. He went pale as the ferry pulled away again, empty, silent. We locked the office and went through the logs together. 2 arrivals recorded. Same ferry. Same passengers. Different dates. He made calls, frantic, and more confirmations came in. The deaths were real. All between midnight and 1. We went to the dock, searching for anyone left behind. Nothing. Just footprints leading away, already fading. The harbor master told me to write everything down, then crossed it out. Then told me to forget it. He said paperwork couldn't handle something like this. By morning, officials arrived. They took the manifests, the tapes, the radio logs. We were told the second arrival was a clerical duplication, a system error caused by the year change. I was warned not to talk about it. The harbor master retired early that spring. I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I imagined it. But I never worked New Year's Eve again. Years later, I looked up the ferry records. That vessel was decommissioned after 1987. Too many incidents, too many stories like mine, quietly buried. Sometimes, just before midnight, I dream of that horn sounding again, In the dream, I don't log the second arrival. I run down the dock, begging them to stop, to turn back, to stay on the ferry where time hasn't caught up with them yet. I always wait before they answer, my hands still reaching for names that were never meant to be written twice. I was already standing in the doorway when everyone else started moving, the adults laughing and pulling coats tighter around themselves, telling me to hurry because they wanted to be outside for the fireworks. I stayed where I was, one foot on the rug and one on the cold floor, shaking my head so hard my ears rang. I told them I wasn't going. I told them I couldn't cross into the new year from inside that house. They thought I was being difficult. My aunt crouched down in front of me and asked what I was scared of, her breath smelling like wine and chocolate. I told her it wasn't fear. It was rules. The house followed rules, and midnight was when they changed. She laughed and said houses don't have rules, then tried to pull me forward. I dug my heel into the rug and screamed. Everyone froze. The countdown had started on the television in the other room. Voices rising, excitement building. My uncle muttered that I was ruining the night. My mother asked me quietly what I meant, her eyes searching my face. I told her the truth the way I understood it then. I said if I crossed the year inside that house, I wouldn't belong to the same people anymore. Someone else would start living there, someone who already knew my name. She knelt beside me and hugged me, telling me I was tired, that visiting relatives always overwhelmed me. But when she tried to lift me, I went stiff and heavy, panic tearing through me like something alive. I pointed down the hallway and told her to look at the pictures. She did, and I watched her face change. The photographs on the wall had shifted. Not much. Just enough. Faces angled slightly differently. Smiles stretched a little too wide. My cousin's eyes in one frame were no longer looking at the camera, but toward the hallway behind us. I told my mother that after midnight, they would all be like that, watching. Waiting. The adults argued in low voices. Outside, fireworks started popping early. The clock crept closer. My grandfather said we should all just go out, let me calm down, come back later. I grabbed his sleeve and begged him not to leave me there. I told him if everyone left, the house would think I was ready. At 10 seconds, they made a decision. My mother stayed. Everyone else went outside. The door closed, and the house felt bigger instantly, like it was stretching to fill the empty space. The television counted down without anyone watching. I pressed my face into my mother's sweater and told her not to move. When 0 hit, something subtle happened. No noise, no flash. Just a feeling like a pressure change in my ears. The house settled. I lifted my head and saw the hallway was longer than before. Doors that hadn't existed now lined the walls. My mother whispered my name, her voice trembling. From one of the new rooms, I heard footsteps. Slow. Familiar. I told my mother that was the other family, the ones who lived here after the year turned. I told her they were polite, but they didn't like sharing. She grabbed me and ran for the door, yanking it open, dragging me outside into the cold. Fireworks exploded overhead. Relatives cheered, unaware. My mother didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street. She turned and looked back. The house lights were on in every window now. Shapes moved inside. When she blinked, they were gone. We stayed away until morning. When we returned, the house was normal again. The hallway short. The pictures unchanged. Everyone said it had been a strange night, that children imagine things. My mother never argued. We never visited again on New Year's Eve. Years later, she told me she believed me. She said when she looked back at the house that night, she saw someone standing at the window who looked exactly like her, smiling patiently, waiting for us to come home. I was pinning the hem when the bell over the shop door rang, sharp and unexpected, and my first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock up. It was already past midnight. New Year's Day had technically begun, and I was alone, finishing paperwork my supervisor hated doing herself. When I looked up, the door was closed, the bell still swaying slightly, and a long garment bag rested against the counter like someone had just set it down and walked away. I stood there for a moment, heart thudding, listening for footsteps outside. Nothing. The street was quiet. I walked to the door, opened it, and leaned out, calling a hesitant hello. No answer. When I pulled the bag onto the counter, my stomach tightened. It was one of ours. I recognized the pale blue fabric immediately. The silk dress rented earlier, that evening to a private client hosting a New Year's celebration at an estate outside the city. I checked the tag. Same name. Same date. Returned at 12:03, according to the timestamp punched into the receipt pocket. That made no sense. The client had booked the dress until the morning. I'd wished her a happy new year myself before she left, nervous but excited, spinning once in front of the mirror to see how the skirt moved. She'd told me it was her first time wearing something like that in public. Even if the party was small, I unzipped the bag, expecting maybe a spilled drink or a torn seam. What I found made me sit down hard on the stool behind the counter. The dress was stained dark along the hem and bodice, not wine, not makeup, something thicker. The stitching I'd finished just hours earlier had been altered, taken in sharply at the waist, in a way only someone with professional skill would attempt, someone like me. But I hadn't touched it after she left. My hands were shaking as I checked the workroom. All tools accounted for. No signs of anyone else being there. I locked the door properly this time and called my supervisor at home. She answered groggily, annoyed, until I told her what had happened. She went quiet, then told me to leave the dress alone, to write everything down, and to go home. She said we'd deal with it after the holiday. I didn't sleep. The client's face kept replaying in my mind. The way she'd smiled when I used her chosen name without hesitation, the relief in her shoulders. In the morning, the news broke. A missing person report. A private celebration disrupted. Guests claiming she'd gone upstairs to change just before midnight and never come back. No sign of struggle. No body. The police came to the shop that afternoon. I showed them the dress. They photographed it, bagged it. Asked me questions that felt like accusations even when they weren't. They asked if I'd ever altered clothing without authorization before. If I'd ever left the shop after hours. I told them the truth. I was careful! I had to be. Days passed. The dress came back to us after testing. Cleaned but still altered. The stains were never fully explained. Officially, nothing linked it to a crime. Unofficially, one of the officers told me the fabric had traces of old blood, degraded in a way that didn't match the timeline. I began to notice changes in the shop after that. Mannequins positioned slightly differently than I remembered. Dresses on racks turned so their fronts faced inward, like they were being modest. One evening, as I swept the floor, I found blue silk thread where I hadn't worked in weeks. The next New Year's Eve, I insisted on closing early. My supervisor agreed without argument. As I was locking the door, the bell rang again. The same sound. The same weight settling against the counter behind me. I didn't turn around right away. I felt watched, evaluated like fabric under measuring tape. When I finally faced it, the dress was there again. Same one. Pristine this time. No stains. No alterations. Just the faint warmth of recent wear lingering in the folds. Inside the pocket was a note, written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for making me real," it said. I didn't make it past midnight. I called the police again. They found nothing. The missing case went cold. Eventually, the shop closed. I moved on, changed cities, changed jobs, changed myself in ways that felt necessary to survive. But every New Year's Eve, just after midnight, I hear a bell that isn't there and remember the weight of that dress in my hands. I keep a small box of blue silk thread in my drawer now. I don't know why. I tell myself it's a reminder of my skill, my care. But sometimes I worry it's an invitation, waiting for the next person who needs help crossing into a year that doesn't want them. I was scrubbing sleep from my eyes and rewinding the footage when I first heard the voice, and my immediate reaction was annoyance rather than fear. It was almost midnight, the slowest part of the shift, and I was checking routine motion flags from earlier in the evening so I could file the report and coast through the rest of the night. The museum was empty, locked tight and silent except for the hum of the monitors. The voice came through the speakers faintly, layered beneath the usual hiss of audio compression. At first I thought it was bleed from a radio somewhere, maybe my own, but I wasn't carrying one. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the volume, and realized the sound was synchronized to the footage. A child's voice, calm and clear, said the number 10. I froze, hand still on the dial. The camera showed the main gallery, empty as it should have been. No guards, no visitors, no movement at all. I rewound the clip a few seconds and played it again. The voice repeated the number, perfectly timed, followed by 9. I felt a tightening in my chest, a sudden awareness of how alone I was in that room. I checked the timestamp. 11:59 and 40 seconds. I scanned the camera feed for anything I might have missed. Shadows. Reflections. Nothing. The voice continued steady and patient, counting down 8, 7. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly, and pulled off my headphones, half expecting the sound to stop. It didn't. The speakers on the desk carried it now, filling the control room. I radioed my supervisor without taking my eyes off the screen, asking if anyone else was on site. He replied immediately, irritated, told me I was the only one in the building, and asked why I was calling during countdown. I didn't answer him. I was watching the footage tick forward, the empty gallery unchanged, while the voice reached 5. My heart was pounding hard enough to make my hands shake. I told myself it had to be an old recording. Some audio artifact accidentally stitched into the file. That explanation felt thin even as I clung to it. 4, 3. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It matched exactly. At 2, every alarm in the building went off at once. Motion sensors, proximity alerts, door warnings, all screaming over each other. I flinched hard enough to stumble backward. The monitors lit up with red boxes, every gallery flagged simultaneously. I shouted into the radio, demanding to know what was happening, my voice cracking in a way I hated. 0 came softly, almost kindly, and then the voice stopped. I ran. Training said to shelter and assess, but adrenaline didn't care about protocol. I bolted out of the control room and into the corridor, alarms echoing through the halls, the sound bouncing and distorting until it felt like something chasing me. I checked the nearest gallery first, then the next. Every space was empty, art undisturbed, barriers intact. Nothing triggered that should have triggered anything. By the time backup arrived, the alarms had reset themselves. The system logs showed no faults, no breaches, no anomalies. I tried to explain about the voice, about the countdown, but saying it out loud made it sound ridiculous. They exchanged looks and told me I was exhausted, that New Year shifts messed with people's heads. I almost believed them until we reviewed the footage together. The audio was there, clear as anything. The countdown, spoken in a young voice that didn't belong to anyone in the building. The technicians checked for interference, hidden devices, prank recordings. Nothing. The file metadata showed the audio was captured live, not overlaid. One of them went pale and suggested we stop digging. Over the next week, I couldn't let it go. I replayed older recordings from previous years, scanning New Year's Eve footage frame by frame. It took hours, but I found it. Every year, same time, same gallery. A countdown buried so deep in the noise, it was almost impossible to hear unless you knew it was there. always ending at 0, always followed by a brief system-wide alert that had been written off as a glitch. I dug into old incident reports, my hands sweating as I read. Years earlier, before my time, a night guard collapsed during a shift. Heart failure. Another slipped on the stairs during an alarm test and broke his neck. A third disappeared entirely, assumed to have wandered off the job. All incidents logged minutes after midnight on New Year's Eve. I went to my supervisor with what I'd found. He listened in silence, then told me to stop. He said the museum didn't need another investigation. Didn't need rumors, didn't need liability. He offered me time off, counseling, a transfer, anything if I would just let it go. I didn't. The next New Year's Eve, I volunteered for the shift. I came prepared. I disabled the alarms manually, set redundant recordings, and sat with my finger on the radio button, waiting. When the voice began, I spoke back to it. I told it I was listening. I told it I wasn't afraid. The countdown continued, steady, inevitable. At 0, nothing happened. No alarms, no system surge, just silence. The footage showed the same empty gallery it always had. The voice didn't return. I quit a month later. The recordings from that night were clean. No countdown, no anomaly. Whatever it was done. I still avoid museums on New Year's Eve. I don't trust quiet spaces anymore, or systems that watch when no one else is there. Sometimes, when everything is still and a clock gets close to midnight, I swear I can hear a voice in the static, checking to see if anyone is listening this time. I was tugging at my mother's sleeve when I saw my name on the clipboard, written neatly in blue ink like it belonged there. The adults were busy laughing and stamping snow off their boots, the lodge loud with voices and music. But I couldn't stop staring at the list. I knew how to read my name. I practiced it every day at school, and there it was, halfway down the guest log, signed in careful cursive that looked nothing like my handwriting. I told my mother someone had made a mistake. She barely glanced at it and said it was probably just a joke, that the lodge reused old paper sometimes. But when I pointed at the date written beside the signature, she frowned. It said December 31st, 1983. I hadn't been born then. I wasn't even supposed to exist yet. She took the clipboard from the receptionist, laughing a little too loudly, and asked who had written it. No one remembered. The receptionist said she'd been there since afternoon and hadn't seen me arrive earlier. My father joked that I must have snuck in ahead of time somehow. Everyone laughed. I didn't. The signature bothered me more than the date. It was my full name, first and last, written correctly, with a loop in the final letter I hadn't learned yet. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the winter air. I asked if we could leave. My parents told me to stop being dramatic and go get some cake. I tried to enjoy myself, but every time someone new arrived, I watched the clipboard. The list grew longer. Names crossed out. New ones added. Mine stayed there unmoved, like it had been waiting. When I went back later, I noticed something else. The handwriting next to my name had faded slightly, like old ink left in the sun. I asked the receptionist if I could see the older logs. She hesitated, then shrugged and handed me a box from under the desk. I flipped through pages until I found the same date, 2 years earlier. My name was there too. Same handwriting. Same place on the list. My stomach twisted. I didn't tell anyone. I felt like the lodge was listening, like saying it out loud would make it worse. As midnight approached, the adults gathered in the main room, glasses raised, voices rising. I stayed near the desk, watching the clock and the guest log, my heart beating faster with each passing minute. At 10 seconds, the receptionist clapped and started counting. I looked down at the page one last time. The ink beside my name darkened, fresh again, as if someone had just signed it. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a certainty settling in my chest. I knew what would happen if midnight came while my name was still there. I ran to my parents and told them we had to leave now. Not after the countdown. Not even outside. Now, my mother knelt and asked why I was shaking. I told her the lodge thought I'd already been here before. I told her it wanted to keep me. The countdown reached 5. My father hesitated, annoyed, then saw my face and changed his mind. He grabbed our coats and dragged us toward the door. The others shouted goodbyes, laughter cutting through the tension. At 1, we were still inside. At 0, the lights flickered. For a moment, the lodge felt wrong. The air thickened. Voices echoed where they shouldn't. I looked back at the desk and saw the receptionist staring at the clipboard, her mouth open. She whispered my name. My father shoved the door open and pulled me outside. Fireworks exploded overhead. Cheers rose behind us. I didn't stop running until we reached the car. My mother locked the doors with shaking hands. The next morning, my parents tried to convince themselves it was nothing. But before we left town, my mother went back alone. She returned pale, holding a torn page. My name was crossed out now, hard enough to tear the paper. Beside it was a note written in the same careful cursive. Checked out early. We never went back to that lodge. Years later, I asked my mother why she believed me. She said when she looked at the old logs, every name on that page was someone who died young, except mine. I was standing near the launch zone, clipboard tucked under my arm, watching the technicians prepare the final sequence, when my radio crackled with a report that didn't make sense. One of the spotters said a shell had misfired during rehearsal, that it had gone the wrong way. I asked him to repeat it, already annoyed, already tired, because paperwork always got sloppy on New Year's Eve. He said it again, slower. He said it had gone down. I told him that was impossible. Fireworks don't fall upward or downward at launch. They either ignite or they don't. He insisted he'd seen it arc toward the crowd, then vanish. No explosion, no debris. I made a note to check the logs and walked toward the control tent, reminding myself that people misinterpret light and sound all the time. The crowd was calm, bundled and cheerful, faces turned toward the sky. I scanned them automatically, checking spacing, exits, density. Everything was within regulation. The technicians swore the system showed no fault. All launches accounted for. No deviation. The shell in question was logged as clean, trajectory upward, altitude normal. I told myself the spotter had panicked. Still, my stomach felt tight as midnight crept closer. I couldn't shake the image of something dropping where it shouldn't. I checked the paper records again, tracing each line with my finger. That shell was marked as having launched downward, straight into the crowd, an obvious error. Someone had scribbled a correction beside it, changing the arrow to point up. I asked who made the correction. No one remembered. At 10 minutes to midnight, a woman approached me holding her arm, asking if there was a first aid station. She said she'd felt something hit her, like a hard shove, but there was no mark yet. I directed her to medical, noting the time. 2 minutes later, a man complained of dizziness. Then another person reported a sharp pain in their shoulder, like a burn without heat. The countdown began. Fireworks launched as planned, beautiful and loud. I watched closely, tracking each burst, each shell. Everything rose. Everything exploded where it should, and yet reports kept coming in over the radio. Injuries, bruises appearing under clothing, cuts with no visible cause. Always the same time noted, 12 o'clock. When midnight hit, the crowd cheered. I felt no relief. I felt watched, measured. Medical staff called for backup. They said people were arriving with identical injuries, angled as if struck from above. Yet no debris had fallen. No scorch marks. No fragments. I pulled the launch records again, my hands shaking now. The corrected arrow had bled through the paper, faint but visible on the back. Underneath, in a different ink, was a note I hadn't seen before. Reverse trajectory confirmed. I confronted the lead technician. He swore on his job that nothing had gone wrong. Then his voice faltered, and he admitted the system had briefly displayed negative altitude readings before resetting. He'd assumed it was a software glitch tied to the year change. He hadn't reported it. By 1 in the morning, the injured numbered 12, all minor, but all unexplained. Authorities wanted answers. I gave them the records, the notes, the witness statements. The official report concluded mass hysteria, crowd pressure, coincidence. I signed it because that's what inspectors do when there's no proof left. But I kept my copy. Weeks later, I reviewed high-speed footage frame by frame. At one point, just before midnight, a shell left the launcher and vanished instantly. No upward trail, no bloom. The next frame showed a faint distortion above the crowd, like heat rippling in reverse. I resigned that spring. I couldn't trust measurements anymore. Couldn't trust direction or cause. Fireworks still go off every year without incident. But sometimes, just before midnight, I remember those injuries appearing from nothing, and I wonder what would have happened if the correction hadn't been made, if the paper record had been allowed to tell the truth.